a forgotten veteran, a boy with a secret, a town that judges too soon. Will one man's quiet kindness unravel a hidden truth? Stay to find out. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Stories that give you chills. The morning fog clung low over Briar Ridge, a sleepy coastal town where the air always smelled faintly of salt and pine. 70-year-old Amos Reed stepped out of his weathered clapboard house, his boots crunching on the gravel path. His navy jacket, faded from decades of wear, hung loose on his broad shoulders. The cuffs were frayed, the elbows patched, but it was warm, and that was enough. His grey hair was cropped short, his face etched with lines that told stories he never shared. In one hand, he carried a battered thermos of black coffee. In the other, a folded newspaper, edges curling from the damp. His eyes, sharp despite their weariness, scanned the quiet street. Another day, same routine. But something in Amos never dimmed. A stubborn spark of kindness, even after life had tried to snuff it out. He'd been a Marine once, back when Vietnam's jungles swallowed young men whole. He came home to a country that spat on his service, to a wife who left when the nightmares wouldn't, to a system that forgot his name. Yet Amos didn't bitter. He fixed fences for neighbours, shoveled snow for widows, and never asked for a dime. His hands, calloused and steady, bore scars from shrapnel and time. Each morning, he walked the mile to the pier, sat on a splintered bench, and watched the tide roll in. It was his church, his confession, his way of remembering the men who didn't make it back. Today, the pier was empty, save for a boy. 12 years old, maybe, with messy brown hair and a patched hoodie 2 sizes too big. He sat hunched on a bench, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the grey waves. A crumpled letter peeked from his pocket. The ink smudged like it had been read 100 times. Amos slowed his steps. The boy didn't look up, but his shoulders tensed, like he expected trouble. Amos knew that look. Too young to carry it. Too old to shake it. "Cold out here," Amos said softly, his voice gravelly but warm. He set his thermos on the bench between them, unscrewed the cap, and poured a steaming cup. "Take it. Warms the bones." The boy's eyes flicked up, wary, then softened. He took the cup, hands trembling slightly, and muttered, "Thanks." Amos nodded, sat a few feet away, and opened his newspaper. No questions, no pressure. Just 2 strangers sharing a quiet moment, the sea murmuring its secrets. The boy sipped the coffee, wincing at the bitterness but drinking anyway. Amos noticed the mud on the boy's sneakers, the way his fingers clutched the letter like a lifeline. Something heavy hung over this kid, something bigger than a bad day. Amos wanted to ask, but he didn't. He'd learned long ago that trust grows in silence, not in prying. Instead, he pointed at the horizon. "See that line where the sky meets the water? Means a storm's coming. Always does." The boy followed his gaze, nodding faintly, like he understood more than the weather. They sat there, the old man and the boy, as the fog began to lift. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the rhythmic crash of waves. The thermos sat between them, steam curling into the chilly air. Amos didn't know the boy's story, but he knew pain when he saw it. And he knew, deep in his gut, that this wasn't just a chance meeting. Something was stirring in Briar Ridge, something that would test the quiet strength he'd carried all these years. The next morning, Amos found the boy on the pier again. Same bench, same patched hoodie, same letter peeking from his pocket. The air was sharper today, thick with the scent of impending rain. Amos approached slowly, his boots scuffing against the warped boards. He set the thermos down, poured 2 cups this time, and slid one toward the boy. "Figured you'd be back," Amos said, his tone easy, like they'd done this for years. The boy took the cup, his fingers less shaky now. "Name's Caleb," he mumbled, eyes fixed on the coffee's dark surface. Amos nodded. "Amos, good to meet you, Caleb." No more words, just the sound of waves and the faint creak of the pier. Over the next few days, this became their ritual. Amos brought coffee, sometimes a muffin from the diner. Caleb brought silence, but it was a silence that softened with each sunrise. One morning, Caleb pointed at a rusted anchor half buried in the sand below. "Bet that's been there forever," he said, voice quiet but curious. Amos squinted at it. "Probably. Holds more stories than most folks in this town." Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. Amos noticed a dog tag hanging from the boy's neck, tucked under his hoodie. Military issue, old. The kind Amos hadn't seen since the 70s. He didn't ask. Some stories need time to unfold. Caleb started opening up, bit by bit. He talked about the tides, the gulls, the way the pier smelled like freedom. Never about the letter, though. Amos didn't push. He shared his own stories instead. Tales of fixing boats, planting gardens, the time he rebuilt a neighbour's porch after a storm. Never about the war. Never about the medals boxed up in his attic or the friends he'd buried. Caleb listened, his eyes bright with something like trust. One day, Amos handed him a pocket knife to carve a stick. "Careful," Amos said. "Keep it steady, like you mean it." Caleb's hands were clumsy at first, but he learned fast. The pier felt warmer those mornings, like the world was holding its breath. Word spread through Briar Ridge like wildfire. Folks noticed Amos lingering at the pier, sharing coffee with some scruffy kid. At the diner, Marge, the waitress with a perm and a smoker's rasp, leaned over the counter. "Amos Reed's playing dad now? That boy looks like trouble." Her customers nodded, forks scraping plates. Across town, Pastor Ellis, who'd known Amos since the 80s, smiled softly. "That's just Amos, always helping strays, human or otherwise." But not everyone was kind. At the hardware store, Tom Grayson, a retired cop with a permanent scowl, snorted. "Kid's probably a runaway. Amos is just asking for drama." Their whispers carried, sharp as the wind off the sea. Amos heard the talk but shrugged it off. He'd faced worse than gossip. Jungles, bullets, a country that turned its back. Still, it stung when Mrs. Larson, his neighbour of 20 years, crossed the street to avoid him. "People think you're crazy, Amos," she'd muttered once. "Wasting time on a kid who'll rob you blind." Betrayal, small but sharp, from someone he'd helped through 2 winters. Amos kept walking to the pier, thermos in hand, because Caleb was there, and that was enough. Then came the test. One grey afternoon, Sheriff Danvers pulled up to the pier in his cruiser, lights off, but presence heavy. He was a broad man, mid-50s, with a moustache that didn't hide his smirk. "Amos," he said, leaning against the hood, "folks are talking. Say this kid's got no business here. No ID, no family, nothing." Amos stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "He's just a boy, Danvers. Needs a place to sit, same as me." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Town's got rules. You keep this up, I'll have to take him in. You want that on your conscience?" Amos felt the weight of the threat, the system flexing its muscle. He thought of Caleb's dog tag, the letter, the trust in those young eyes. "I'll handle it," Amos said, his jaw tight. Danvers drove off, but the air felt colder. Amos looked at Caleb, who'd overheard every word. "Don't worry, kid," Amos said. "We'll figure this out." But inside, doubt crept in. Was he doing more harm than good? The conflict grew, a storm brewing in Briar Ridge. At the town meeting that week, Tom Grayson stood up, voice booming. "Amos Reed's harbouring a delinquent. What's next? Opening a halfway house?" A few clapped, others murmured agreement. Marge chimed in. "He's stirring trouble, plain and simple." Even Pastor Ellis stayed quiet, his support wavering under the crowd's glare. Amos sat in the back, hands folded, feeling the town he'd served turn against him. He thought of Caleb, alone on that pier, and the dog tag that hinted at a story no one else cared to hear. The betrayal stung deeper now, not just from neighbours, but from a community he'd poured his heart into. He walked home under a heavy sky, the thermos swinging at his side, wondering if kindness was worth the cost. The next morning, Amos woke with a heaviness he couldn't shake. His hands trembled as he filled the thermos, the coffee's bitter scent mixing with the ache in his chest. He'd promised Caleb they'd figure things out, but the sheriff's words echoed like a warning shot. He walked to the pier, boots dragging, expecting to see the boy's hunched silhouette. But the bench was empty. No patched hoodie, no muddy sneakers, no crumpled letter. Just the pier, stretching lonely into the mist. Amos stood frozen, the thermos suddenly heavy in his hand. "Caleb," he called, voice cracking. Only the waves answered, cold and indifferent. He sat on the bench, waiting. Minutes turned to hours. The fog thickened, wrapping the pier in a ghostly shroud. Amos's mind raced. Had Caleb run? Been taken? He thought of the dog tag, the letter, the trust they'd built. Had he failed the boy, just like he'd failed his men in Vietnam, the ones who never came home? His fists clenched, knuckles white against the thermos's smooth metal. Damn it, he whispered, voice breaking. He'd let himself care. And now the emptiness cut deeper than any shrapnel. The pier, once a refuge, felt like a graveyard. Word of Caleb's absence spread through Briar Ridge like a spark in dry grass. By noon, the diner was buzzing. Marge leaned over the counter, voice loud. Told you that kid was trouble. Probably stole something and bolted. Tom Grayson nodded, smug. Amos should have known better. Playing hero always backfires. Even Mrs. Larson, who had once called Amos a friend, shook her head. He brought this on himself, meddling where he didn't belong. The accusations grew wilder. Some said Caleb was a thief, others a runaway with a rap sheet. Amos, they claimed, was a fool, too soft for his own good. The town's judgment was a blade, and it cut deep. Amos heard it all, the whispers trailing him like shadows. He walked home, head down, the thermos untouched. At the grocery store, a clerk he'd known for years avoided his gaze. At the post office, two men laughed behind his back, mimicking his slow stride. The betrayal was total now, not just from neighbours, but from the town he'd given everything to. He thought of the system that had spit him out after the war, the wife who'd walked away, the medals collecting dust. Had he been wrong to trust again? Was kindness just a fool's errand? He sat in his kitchen, staring at the walls, the silence louder than any gunfire. That night, Amos couldn't sleep. He pulled a wooden box from under his bed, its edges worn smooth by time. Inside were his medals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, ribbons he hadn't looked at in decades. Beneath them, a faded photo of his squad, smiling in a jungle clearing. He traced their faces, his fingers lingering on the ones who didn't make it. I kept my promises, he whispered, voice thick. He thought of Caleb's dog tag, the letter, the boy's quiet trust. Something in him stirred, a fire that hadn't died. He'd fought for those men, for their memory, for a country that forgot them. He'd fight for Caleb too, no matter what the town thought. He closed the box, jaw set, and knew he wasn't done yet. Message 4. Revelation, catharsis, community transformation, legacy of kindness, final image, and call to action. The next day, Amos was at the pier at dawn, thermos in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. He'd come every morning since Caleb vanished, refusing to give up. The town's whispers had grown vicious, but he tuned them out. Then, a black SUV rolled into town, its tyres crunching on the gravel road. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, in a crisp navy uniform, her face stern but kind. She carried a manila folder and walked straight to Amos's house. Mr. Reed, she said, voice clear. I'm Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wells. We need to talk about Caleb. Amos led her inside, heart pounding. Wells sat at his kitchen table, opening the folder. Caleb's grandfather was Master Sergeant Daniel Holt, Marines, Vietnam. He died last year. Caleb's been alone since, running from foster homes. She slid a photo across the table. Daniel Holt, young, in uniform, with Amos's squad. Amos's breath caught. Dan, he whispered. His friend, his brother, gone without a goodbye. Wells continued. Caleb was looking for you. That dog tag, it was his grandfather's. The letter? Instructions to find you, the man who saved Dan's life in '69. Amos's eyes burned. He'd pulled Dan from a burning chopper, carried him 3 miles through hell. He hadn't known Dan had a grandson. Caleb's safe, Wells said. We found him 2 days ago, hiding in a boathouse. He wouldn't talk until he knew you'd be told. She handed Amos a note, written in Caleb's shaky hand. Amos, you gave me a place to breathe. I'm sorry I ran. Tell Grandpa I found you. Amos's hands shook as he read it, tears falling for the first time in years. Wells stood. You gave that boy hope, Mr. Reed. And you honoured a Marine's memory. She saluted, sharp and true. Amos returned it, his spine straight, his heart full. Word of the truth spread faster than the lies. By evening, the diner was quiet, Marge's face red with shame. Tom Grayson stood outside, head bowed, unable to meet Amos's gaze. Mrs. Larson knocked on Amos's door, tears in her eyes. I was wrong, she said. We all were. Amos nodded, forgiving without words. At the town hall, Pastor Ellis took the podium. Amos Reed showed us what honour looks like. We judged, but he loved. The crowd stood, clapping, not loud but deep, like a tide turning. Briar Ridge changed. The pier became a gathering place, not just for Amos and Caleb, who returned to visit, but for others, vets, kids, anyone needing a moment's peace. A plaque went up by the bench, simple bronze reading, "For Amos Reed, whose kindness rebuilt what war broke." Caleb, now in a stable home, sent Amos letters, each one signed, "Your friend, Caleb." The town started a veterans fund, small but growing, to help those the system forgot. Amos didn't ask for it, but he smiled when he saw it. Amos found peace, not in applause, but in the quiet mornings at the pier. He still brought his thermos, still watched the tides. But now others joined him, vets sharing stories, kids asking questions, neighbours offering coffee. His kindness, once mocked, had planted a seed. It grew into a legacy, not of medals, but of hearts mended, trusts restored. Caleb's last letter arrived on Veterans Day, tucked in an envelope with Dan's dog tag. "Keep this," it read. "You're the hero Grandpa said you were." Amos wore it, not for pride, but for memory. The sun rose over Briar Ridge, painting the pier gold. Amos sat on the bench, thermos open, steam curling into the air. A gull cried, the waves whispered, and the town felt alive, kinder, whole. One man's quiet courage had reminded them, honour doesn't shout, it endures. Tell us what moved you in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. These stories can't be missed. The sun was barely up when Amos Reed stepped onto the pier, his boots steady on the weathered boards. Fog curled over Briar Ridge, softening the edges of the sleepy coastal town. His thermos, battered but warm, dangled from one hand. The air smelled of salt and damp pine, sharp enough to wake the soul. 70 years old, Amos carried the weight of decades. Vietnam's jungles, a country's scorn, a life of quiet scars. But today, his grey eyes held something new. Resolve, hard-earned, unshakable. He'd come every morning since Caleb disappeared, refusing to let the boy's absence break him. The town's whispers had turned cruel, calling him a fool, a meddler, a man chasing ghosts. Amos didn't care. He'd fought worse battles than gossip. He sat on the splintered bench, poured a cup of coffee, and waited. A low rumble broke the silence, a black SUV rolling down the gravel road. Its tyres crunched to a stop near the pier. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, in a crisp navy uniform, her dark hair pulled tight. Her face was stern but kind, like she'd seen too much but still believed in something. She carried a manila folder and walked toward Amos with purpose. "Miss Reed?" she said, voice clear as a bell. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wells. We need to talk about Caleb." Amos's heart thudded, but he stood, slow and steady, his navy jacket creased from wear. "Come inside," he said, leading her to his clapboard house. In the kitchen, the air smelled of coffee and old wood. Wells sat at the scarred oak table, opening the folder. Caleb's grandfather was Master Sergeant Daniel Holt, Marines, Vietnam. He passed last year. Caleb's been alone since, running from foster homes. She slid a photo across the table, a young Daniel Holt, grinning in jungle fatigues, standing with Amos's squad. Amos's breath caught. "Dan," he whispered, fingers tracing the faded image. His friend, his brother, the man he'd carried through fire. Wells's voice softened. "Caleb was looking for you. That dog tag he wore? It was Holt's. The letter in his pocket? Instructions to find you. The man who saved Dan's life in '69. Amos's chest tightened. He'd pulled Dan from a burning chopper, carried him 3 miles through hell, shrapnel tearing his own skin. He hadn't known Dan had a grandson, hadn't known Dan remembered. "Caleb's safe," Wells said, her eyes steady. "We found him 2 days ago, hiding in a boathouse down the coast. He wouldn't talk until he knew you'd be told." She handed Amos a note, scrawled in Caleb's shaky hand. "Amos, you gave me a place to breathe. I'm sorry I ran. Tell Grandpa I found you." Amos read it, his calloused hands trembling. Tears fell, silent, onto the paper, the first he'd shed in years. He looked up, voice thick. "He's okay? Wells nodded. He's with a good family now. Because of you, he didn't give up. She stood, saluted sharp and true. You honoured a Marine's memory, Mr. Reed, and you saved his grandson. Amos returned to the salute, spine straight, heart full. By dusk, the truth swept through Briar Ridge like a cleansing tide. The diner, once a hive of gossip, fell quiet. Marge, the waitress with the smoker's rasp, stared at her coffee pot, face red with shame. I called him a fool, she muttered, voice breaking. Tom Grayson, the retired cop who'd led the charge against Amos, stood outside the hardware store, head bowed. He couldn't meet Amos's gaze when they passed. Mrs. Larson, the neighbour who'd crossed the street to avoid him, knocked on his door that night. Tears streaked her face. I was wrong, Amos, she said. We all were. Amos nodded, his voice gentle. Folks make mistakes. It's what you do after that matters. She hugged him, sobbing, and he let her, forgiving without words. At the town hall, Pastor Ellis took the podium, his voice steady but heavy. Amos Reed showed us what honour looks like, he said. We judged when we should have listened. He loved when we turned away. The crowd stood, over 200 strong, their applause not loud but deep, like a heartbeat. Marge was there, eyes wet. Tom Grayson sat in the back, hands clasped, silent for once. Even Sheriff Danvers, who'd threatened Amos, clapped slowly, his smirk gone. Amos stood at the edge of the room, thermos in hand, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the shift. He thought of Caleb, safe now, and Dan, whose memory lived on. It was enough. Briar Ridge began to change, slowly but surely. The pier, once Amos's solitary refuge, became a gathering place. Vets started showing up, sharing stories over coffee. Kids like Caleb came to listen, their eyes wide with wonder. Neighbours brought muffins, thermoses, smiles. A bronze plaque went up by the bench, simple but proud. For Amos Reed, whose kindness rebuilt what war broke. The town started a veterans fund, small but growing, to help those the system forgot. Amos didn't ask for it, but when he saw the first cheque cashed for a struggling vet, he smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. Caleb, now in a stable home 2 towns over, sent letters every month. Each one was signed, Your friend, Caleb. Amos found peace, not in the applause, but in the quiet mornings at the pier. He still brought his thermos, still watched the tides roll in. But now, others joined him, a vet with a limp, a teenager with questions, a widow with a story. His kindness, once mocked, had planted a seed. It grew into a legacy, not of medals hidden in a box, but of hearts mended, trusts restored. One Veterans Day, a package arrived from Caleb. Inside was Dan's dog tag, polished and heavy, and a letter. Keep this, it read. You're the hero Grandpa said you were. Amos slipped the tag around his neck, not for pride, but for memory. It rested against his heart, warm as the sunrise. The legacy of Amos's kindness rippled beyond Briar Ridge. Caleb, now 16, spoke at a school assembly about the man who gave him hope. The Veterans Fund grew, helping dozens, then hundreds. The pier became a pilgrimage, a place where people left notes, coffee cups, even dog tags, honouring the quiet heroes who carried on. Amos never sought the spotlight, but he didn't need to. His life, scarred, steady, kind, spoke louder than any speech. He'd fought for his men, for Caleb, for a town that learned to listen. And in doing so, he reminded them all. Honour doesn't demand recognition. It endures, quiet and true, in the smallest acts of courage. The sun rose over Briar Ridge, painting the pier in hues of gold and amber. Amos sat on the bench, thermos open, steam curling into the crisp air. A gull cried overhead, waves whispered against the pilings, and the town felt alive, kinder, whole. One man's quiet strength had shown them the power of a single spark. Honour lives where kindness breathes. Tell us what moved you in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. These stories can't be missed.